Hey everybody, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host of the Dark Stuff channel here on YouTube. Thank you so much for checking out my latest video. As always, it is much appreciated. So today you have tuned into Rock of Aging episode 7. This is the show where my co-host Erika and I explore the depths of our hair metal past and try to discover what it is about this music and this era that has captivated us for decades. This is your go-to spot for 80s metal conversation and community. Hello, Erika. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Maybe less great, but still doing okay. I mean, I'm not letting it get to me. We're almost we're taping this a little before 4th of July. So we're about ready to have a fun weekend and all of this kind of stuff. But yeah. Stress is definitely at a level that is not my norm at the moment.
But you're wearing your Kiss shirt. I'm wearing my Bon Jovi shirt.
That's true.
That automatically make the day better?
So before we get going, let's point out that we do have the second ever Rock of Aging playlist. It features the artist that we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Now, I'm not going to spoil it by saying what it is. Suffice it to say, it is on Spotify and Apple Music. The links are below. What have you been up to since we last spoke about a month ago?
Because of what I do, which is book concerts, I've been to a lot of concerts.
Anything that stood out really?
So I can think of a few. First of all, just last night, I saw Foreigner at an outdoor venue in Council Bluffs, which is right outside of Omaha.
How hot was that?
I've booked Foreigner before. And so I think they're great. Kelly Hansen, who of course I became a fan of back when he was the lead singer for the band Hurricane in the late 80s, early 90s. But Kelly Hansen has been the lead singer of Foreigner for the last 20 years, and he is a phenomenal lead vocalist. He still sounds great. I understand he's leaving Foreigner at the end.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. Is he the guy that's leaving?
He is, yes. Okay. And the guy that's taking his place was actually on stage last night. He was playing guitar, and I guess he's going to take over as the lead vocalist when Kelly departs later this year. But it was a phenomenal show, just hit after hit after hit, not one song that the entire audience didn't know. So that's always fun. I also just last weekend met Frankie Valli, which I was very excited about. We had Frankie Valli at one of our theaters in Omaha, the Orpheum. And I've been a fan of Frankie Valli's literally since the days of Grease. I think that movie came out when I was about 4 years old, and I loved it. And I loved the music. Of course, he sang the title track, Grease, which is the song that he opened with. And the audience absolutely loved him. There's been a lot of publicity about Frankie Valli.
I was going to say, was he in better shape than that viral video that kind of went around about a year ago or so, where he looked like he was barely there?
Yeah,
he's in better shape now, or I mean...
he's 90. And so, right. When here's my thing about everyone that's aging. I have just so much respect for all of what they did that whatever shape they're in now, I don't really much care. I say the same thing about Vince Neil. I still want to see Vince Neil sing Mötley Crüe songs. I still want to see Frankie Valli perform these hits. Now, you can debate on and on about whether it's a good performance or not. And certainly people should feel like they got their money's worth. But for me, that was completely worth it.
As far as I've seen a couple of really good shows. I saw Zepparella, which is an all-woman Led Zeppelin tribute band.
Awesome.
That is probably the best tribute band I've ever seen. I've seen plenty, but this is maybe my favorite one. The only one that I wanted to see more than once. Like usually you see it, you kind of get it out of your system. You kind of don't need to go again. In this case, this is my second time. I would absolutely go again for a third time when they usually play every year. I saw a pretty different kind of metal show with the Melvins and Napalm Death touring together. I did a video on that. It'll be linked or whatever, but that was more extreme metal show than the kind of stuff that we're doing on Rock of Aging. What's been playing a lot on my iPod and my turntable and all that is the new album from a group called Deep Sea Diver. Not metal at all, so I'm not trying to mislead you into checking out a non-metal record. It is definitely indie, but the woman who's the singer and guitar player used to play with Beck and used to play with a lot of other artists, so she's really a top-notch talent. So
I saw them. I think they opened for Pearl Jam. They
did some touring with Pearl Jam last year.
I saw them in LA with Pearl Jam last year. They were great.
Yeah, I really do like that woman, Jessica Dobson, the front person for that band. So. Imagine you didn't know anything about this 80s metal, hair metal, whatever, and you were saying to yourself, wow, I would really like to look into it, but like, I don't even know where to start, So this is going to be your helper. We have decided to give you each 5 albums to start your 80s hair metal collection. We each picked 5. They are different. I think one of the things that we noticed is, even though our slight age difference is only 3 years, I'm 3 years older, but you texted me yours, I texted you mine, and then your response was, what year did you graduate? Like, because they were slightly different.
Well, and another note to that, another difference I think you're going to see is that I'm a girl and you're a guy. And I think there are some differences in terms of what guys gravitated toward, and what, for me, like, I was 13 when I got into this music, what 13-year-old girls gravitated toward. So I think
definitely different. Yeah, definitely different.
When I was putting this list together, it was kind of with that in mind. Like, if I'm talking to like a 21-year-old, like my son, who's never really gotten into this music, doesn't know much about it, what were the 5 albums that I thought were the most impactful? But just like you, I'm picking albums that really affected me, that made me feel something, because I think at the end of the day, the albums that are most important to you individually are the ones that you have like the closest emotional connection to. And so for me, like, that's what these 5 albums are. I don't know, I'm not speaking to the musicality of any of them, the critical acclaim. I'm just talking about the albums that I loved the most.
Start off maybe with a runner-up or 2, like 2 runners-up maybe that didn't quite make your list. And you could say why they didn't quite make it. This obviously is a great album regardless, but this is a runner-up. I will start with one as a runner-up, and this did not make my list, but I'm going to start with Cinderella, Night Songs.
By the way, that album also made my list of runner-ups. So
did it really?
I'm on the
Okay,
same
so we're
page
both
with
talking about this. So this is my runner-up. This is a great album, one of the most misleading album covers in the history of music, because they look all dolled up on the front, but you listen to it, it's pretty hard rock. Like, it is not that glammy. It's clear that a band like Cinderella and their art director, the label, somebody was like, this is the look right now for these bands, and you've got to incorporate that into your thing. And I think one of the things that we'll discover, again, is the difference between our picks, is that the look became more central to things by about 86 or so. Like, my theory is, I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but say the hair metal era is like 86 to 91. And the stuff before that is sort of proto hair metal, but it really hadn't been defined as anything other than it's metal. Like, they didn't genreify it so much or separate it out the way it went into thrash, and then it went into glam, and then it went into this, or then it went into that. In 83, 84, it was just metal. So some of my picks are from that era, but they weren't doing the look per se, but they were doing everything else. The sound is there. It's catchy hard rock. It's more emphasis on hooks than heaviness. It's there's always a ballad on the album. There's, that kind of thing. That's the definition of what we're working with. So I do think the years make a difference, but only if you're looking at the band, not necessarily if you're listening to it. That's my caveat there.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, that was my number 1 runner-up, was Cinderella. That was also your runner-up too, yes?
It was, yes, because I absolutely love that album, and Tom Kiefer is one of my all-time favorite vocalists, probably my favorite vocalist. So I love that album, Night Songs, and it had so many hits on it. Somebody Save Me, Shake Me, Night Songs, all of the greats. And so I put that on my list of runner-ups. The only reason I don't think I put it on my list of top 5 is because at the time, it didn't impact me the same way the 5 that I'm going to list impacted me. And so we'll talk about that as we get into the details, but great album, totally agree. But I'll share with you another runner-up that I had, and I don't know what your other runner-up is, but mine was Whitesnake. And
I thought that was going to be one of your picks for sure. I thought that was going to be one of your picks for sure.
Oh man, I really wrestled with that one because I almost put it on my top 5. The reason I didn't is, again, because I had some others that I just felt like had to go on the top 5 list. Whitesnake didn't quite make the cut, but Whitesnake's album Whitesnake was phenomenal. Still of the Night, Here I Go Again, Is This Love? And really, like, with Whitesnake, it's so tied to the videos and Tawny Katane and the whole environment of Whitesnake. And so fantastic album, just didn't quite make my top 5.
Okay, well, my other runner-up was this one here, Kiss Asylum, This was their 1985 album. Now, I could have just done all Homer picks and just did all the Kiss records of the 80s, but I'm not a jerk like that. I'm not going to do that. This is really Kiss's first glam hair metal album, in my opinion. And if you follow Kiss, you know, into the 80s, they had an album called Creatures of the Night in 82. It was the beginning of their comeback after they really slipped from popularity. A really heavy record, but doesn't really fit this type of music per se. Then they do Lick It Up, and then they do Animalize, and the sound is going towards that sound. But I think by 1985, they realized they got to embrace the look too. Like, they can't just look like older guys from the 70s. They got to glam it up. And they did. I think they took it a little too far on this album. If you look at photos of them, they look kind of silly in the clothes. But at the same time, I understood they were seeing the writing on the wall. Like, if they want to continue going in this type of music, you have to add a little something visual. And they were the kings of visual in the 70s. It's weird that they were playing catch up in the 80s, that they really didn't, you know, they were clearly following trends. Def Leppard, Pyromania.
Great album.
Okay. This album from 1983, again, a little bit before the era, but at the same time, I don't think you can define 80s glam metal, hard rock, you know, hair metal, whatever it is you call this particular type of stuff, and not include Def Leppard.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Yeah, this album hit me like a freight train. Now, I was 12 when it came out, so I had the benefit of being a kid. But it's hard to remember if you weren't alive at that period. I mean, Def Leppard is still really big now. They still play stadiums, and they're a popular band. But in 1983, they were headlining arenas. They had a top 5 album. They had like multiple singles on the charts. They were everywhere. This was the era where they all wore the British flags. This was the era where they were just like, I don't know, they were literally everywhere. They were part of pop culture even. I mean, you think now pop culture is like Taylor Swift and stuff, but in 1983 it was Def Leppard. You got Rock Till You Drop, you got Photograph, you got Stage Fright, Too Late for Love was a big one. Action Not Words was really cool. It's just generally a near perfect album. Now, a lot of people don't know that Phil Collins came into that band midway through. There's a mysterious former member of Def Leppard who he played on half of it before the band fired him. That's a little note I like to point out because I feel like Pete Willis is the forgotten Def Leppard guy. Like, that nobody remembers he was ever even in the band, and yet he's on the first couple records. He's that little guy. He's like 5'1".
I literally don't even know this person.
5'6" with the hair.
Me.
He had a drinking problem. They all had drinking problems.
I was going to say he was the only one.
Yeah, his was to the extreme that Mötley, the producer at the time, basically said, "You got to ditch this guy. He can't cut it." And they had to cut him loose. They brought in Phil Collins, and he's been the guy ever since. It sucks for that guy, but if you're the guy in a band of drinkers that can't handle his drinking, like you're out. I saw Def Leppard on this tour at the Civic Auditorium, and Uriah Heep was the opener. I remember on that one. I think this album is absolutely timeless. For me, Def Leppard peaked, I think, at Pyromania. I like them beyond that, but this was the culmination. The first 2 records, the first one was good. The second one was better. This one was perfect. They blew up. And then we all know what happened to Def Leppard. A lot of unfortunate activity, and that is, you know, Rick Allen lost his arm in an accident, and that delayed the making of the next album for a while because he had to train himself how to play electronic drums. This was Rick Allen, full 2 arms in this era, and so you get the real drums. So I don't know. That's why I picked this one. I think everyone should start with it. You've got your hits like Photograph, but you've also got some great album cuts.
No question. And actually what's interesting is I really got involved in this music deeply in 1987, the summer of 1987. And so those albums are the ones that you're going to kind of find on my list. But once I got familiar with these bands, then I went back and started listening to the earlier stuff. None of that stuff is on my list because they didn't connect with me quite the same way. But that's a fantastic album and a perfect example of what I went back and listened to after I discovered Def Leppard. The Pyromania album is, of course, classic. So I think that's a great choice. 2 thumbs up. Well, if we're going alphabetically, and actually it probably makes sense because this probably was the album that really engaged me with this music to begin with, but it's Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet. And I'm wearing my Bon Jovi tee today. I actually have 2 Bon Jovi frame graphics on my wall. Slippery When Wet, what do you even say about it? It was the 3rd Bon Jovi album, so it definitely was not their first time in the studio, but it was their first #1 album in the US. Oh, yeah. They had 3 top 10 Billboard hits, You Give Love a Bad Name, Living on a Prayer. Both of those hit #1, and Wanted, Dead or Alive peaked at #7. This album is ranked 44th in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list of the definitive 200 albums of all time. So while I'm talking about it because I love it so much, it was obviously a critical success as well. It sold 15 million copies, making it one of the best-selling albums in the US. So this album came out in 1986, but I don't think I paid close attention to it until, again, the summer of 1987. I was 13 years old. I had just moved back to my hometown in South Sioux City, Nebraska. I'd been living in Dallas with my family, spent my 7th grade year in Dallas, and just moved back to Nebraska. And that is the summer I got into all of this. 1987 is when the Wanted video premiered on MTV, and it ended me. That summer, my friend Tina and I recorded the Wanted video, and we watched it over and over and over again for hours. I mean, hours. And still to this day, like, I remember every single move from that video. Like, I hear the song and I can picture the exact video correlation with each lyric. Like, I know that video like my own DNA. And Wayne Isham directed that video, and that's notable because he directed everyone's videos back then. Def Leppard.
He was huge. Yeah, he was a massive director. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also another little tidbit, in 1989, John and Richie sang an acoustic version of Living on a Prayer and Wanted at the MTV Video Music Awards, and they absolutely killed it. That is, I think, what started MTV's Unplugged series, which became very popular after that. Yeah. But Tina and I loved those harmonies so much. She would perform as Richie, and I've always had lead singer vibes, so I would perform as John. And then we would practice our harmonizing until we thought it sounded like as pristine as John and Richie. So that song is so meaningful and such a touch point for me. One note, I have to say this. I say this every time I talk about Bon Jovi. We were always Richie fans. I had other friends who were all over the John Bon Jovi bandwagon, but not us. It was Richie all the way, no question. So just a little love for Richie Sambora because we absolutely adored him.
I was big on this album at the time when it came out. I had, we did a video entirely on Bon Jovi on the 7800 Degrees Fahrenheit album. It'll be linked below. You should check that out. And we did sort of talk about our early fan days of Bon Jovi. And I was on the scene when the first album came out in 84, and I liked it. I got really into them with 7800 Degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, just like everyone else seemingly at the time, 1986, I was 15. So when that album came out, I was way into it. I saw Bon Jovi on that tour opening for 38 Special, which was very weird.
That is weird.
They opened the show and the entire crowd was pretty much there for them. And then half the crowd filed out before 38 Special even played. So I kind of felt bad for them on that, but not too bad because that's the business. I mean, it happened. You could not watch MTV without seeing a Bon Jovi video in 1986 through probably 1989 within like 15 minutes. Like, you put it on and bam, they're on there. What always impressed me about Bon Jovi, even though my fandom has dipped over the years, but I've always been impressed with just their work ethic. They wouldn't go out and do 50 shows. They do 250. Like, they never stopped playing over and over and over and over and over. And if you wonder why their stuff is considered so timeless and it's on that, it's because they worked it, like you can't just play 20 cities and that's it. Like, Bon Jovi would play every city.
Yeah, they truly did. And I think I might have brought this up on a former episode, but I actually saw like a an in-person interview with John Bon Jovi at a Polestar conference over the last couple of years. And he was being interviewed by his agent, Rob Light. And Rob asked him like what he sort of regretted about that time when they were really catapulting to stardom. And he actually said if he had to do it over again, he would tell his younger self to slow down, because they absolutely ran themselves into the ground just from an emotional and a physical standpoint, because like you said, they were performing every night as often as they could. They didn't take any time off, hardly in between albums even. It was like released New Jersey and now we're out again for New Jersey. So they were hustlers for sure.
I think you cannot have an 80s metal, hair metal collection without having this album, Mötley Crüe, Shout at the Devil, in your collection. Now, this, of course, is the Tame cover with the picture of the band. The vinyl was black on black. It was like Spinal Tap or whatever with the black pentagram on the black cover. So it's sort of hard to visualize, but it is going along with their sort of scary image that they had at the time. There's no doubt that Mötley Crüe qualifies for this type of stuff from like, say, Theater of Pain onward. But this album was really pretty heavy, and there was no such thing as glam metal, hair metal, whatever. They were doing black leather and studs, and they did have makeup, but I felt it was more like an Alice Cooper, just like a touch, you know, like it wasn't all over and it wasn't like a Poison type of deal, but it was maybe Alice Cooper kind of accenting. However, this album set me on a path, whereas I'd been listening mostly to older bands that were still around, like, you know, your Kiss, ZZ Top, whatever. Mötley Crüe was like a new band that I just latched onto big time. Their videos were stellar. I mean, I probably had a similar experience to your Wanted Dead or Alive of watching Looks That Kill over and over and over and over once I could get it on videotape. It was harder to get Too Young to Fall in Love because that video wasn't played as much. This was pre-Headbangers Ball, folks. They didn't really have a heavy metal show, so you just had to kind of catch it when it was on. Too Young to Fall in Love was the other video, and I couldn't get that on video. I know I tried taping it like a bunch of times. I could never get it right.
So hard to catch it.
Well, because you don't know when it's coming. They don't tell you. So all of a sudden you have to have your tape in the thing and ready to go, you know, and depending on the level of your VCR, does it start up fast? Does it take 2 minutes to get going? I mean, it was just like, it was a whole thing back then. Plus, side note, my family was the one family that chose Beta over VHS.
Oh, we had Beta.
So you were the other one. My dad was insistent that it was a higher quality, it was better, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but the public chose the other one. So we're stuck with this shitty format that nobody wants. It does give a scary vibe. So it's not a party rock album the way most Mötley Crüe albums are, mostly about having fun. This was definitely on the scarier side when you're talking about like Bastard. You got God Bless the Children of the Beast. That's just a little instrumental. Shout at the Devil itself, Looks That Kill, Helter Skelter, their Beatles cover is pretty good. Red Hot, great. Awesome. Too Young to Fall in Love, awesome. Knock 'Em Dead Kid, great. 10 Seconds to Love. Danger is sort of a ballad at the end of the album, but I would argue it's really not a traditional hair metal ballad because they started doing that more with Home Sweet Home. That was the big one. For me, this is the definitive Mötley Crüe album. I will always see them looking like this. I will always see Nikki Sixx looking that way. I'll always see Mick Mars looking that way. Vince, hard to see him any other. He's kind of a bloated guy now, but he was there. Peak Vince Neil at this point in time.
Yeah, I love that album. It was a little early for me, but that album was actually my first exposure to Mötley Crüe. I was exposed to Shout at the Devil when it came out in the fall of 1983. I was just starting 4th grade at the time. That's and my friend's older brother had a Mötley album. And I remember the opening of the album, which was that creepy In the Beginning monologue sort of track that went right into Shout at the Devil. And I was like entranced and also frightened, but mostly entranced. Like, I had never heard anything like that, sort of like scary, but also I wanted to hear more. Now I kind of dropped Mötley Crüe for a while because again, I was real young at that time and I was into Michael Jackson and Madonna and some of the poppier stuff when I was a kid. But that was actually my first exposure to Mötley Crüe as well. And going back and listening to that album, I 100% agree. Like every song on there is classic vintage Mötley Crüe. number 2 is also Def Leppard, but it is Hysteria.
Okay.
Again, this album came out in August of 1987, right in my prime time of getting to know this music. They had so many hits on this album: Women, Rocket, Animal, Love Bites, Pour Some Sugar on Me, Armageddon It. I mean, Hysteria, the list goes on and on and on. This was the 4th studio album for Def Leppard. It was a follow-up to, as you said, the band's breakthrough album, which was 1983's Pyromania. Rick Allen had already lost his arm by the time I got into Def Leppard, so that's how I first got to know them. And also, this was the last album to feature Steve Clark, who, of course, passed away in 1991. But Hysteria was like that tight group, of course. And the album hit number 1 on the Billboard 200. It's Def Leppard's best-selling album to date. I read somewhere that producer Mutt Lange had a goal, and that was to make Hysteria essentially a hard rock version of Michael Jackson's Thriller, in that every track was a potential hit single. And apparently, by the way, hardcore Def Leppard fans did not love that concept. They wanted something harder, something that was closer to Pyromania, and instead they got something that was a little bit more poppy. But I absolutely adored this album. I wanted to just have a disclaimer here. I never thought anyone in Def Leppard was particularly hot. So I don't know that I latched on to this band in the same way I did Mötley Crüe or Bon Jovi, but their music is undeniable. So many Def Leppard songs have become part of just pop culture. And every time I see the band now, they are so tight. And I think you have to give credit to any band who keeps the group together after decades of albums and tours. Of course, Vivian Campbell replaced Steve Clark after his death, but that was all the way back in 1992, which was the year I graduated from high school.
To jump off of what you had said earlier about the change in sound, like I was very aware of that, because if Hysteria was your introduction, say, to Def Leppard, then you wouldn't notice the difference. But it's the same band, but it's very different sounding, and it has a lot to do with the drums, because of the fact that Rick Allen lost his arm, and the band did the honorable thing, in my opinion, of staying with their band member and trying to adapt to his condition, and not just because I mean, most bands, honestly, if this had been Ratt, if Bobby Blotzer lost his arm after the first out, they'd have been like, later, bro. Like Women, I think, was the first single, but then it was the second single that exploded. And Mercury Records had spent, like, I don't know how many millions of dollars making Hysteria, because of course it took a lot longer than they had expected, and I think there was a lot of nervous people. And then the record took off and became their biggest album ever, and one of the albums, the decade's defining album. So people worried a little bit prematurely. So, okay, that was your second one. So far you've got Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet, and Def Leppard, Hysteria in your starter pack. I have Def Leppard, Pyromania, Mötley Crüe, Shout at the Devil. And that means my next one would be this one with Tawny Katane right in the front. I know she's more associated with Whitesnake, but she is on 2 different Ratt albums.
Well, she was Robin Crosby's girlfriend, wasn't she?
That is true. That is true. They were like high school girlfriend, boyfriend. Yeah. It came out when I was 13 in 1984, and I was blown away by this album. I mean, I still like it. I've been listening to it so much. I think every song is good on it. It's a perfect 10 out of 10. They did define a lot of the 80s hair metal sound without it being a known quantity. In 1984, it wasn't known yet. They had a little bit of a glammy look, but it was still mixed with kind of early 80s where they were at. They would wear spandex and whatnot, but they didn't get dolled up per se. So it's kind of a mix. The look was evolving, the sound was evolving, but Ratt had it on that first album. You know, Wanted Man, You're in Trouble, Round and Round, In Your Direction, She Wants Money, Lack of Communication. I mean, the Morning After, I'm Insane. Every single track is good on that album. They got so big so fast, again with videos. You can't talk about the rise of Ratt without talking about that Round and Round video, which has Milton Berle, the famous TV host and comedian from the 50s, whose nephew was Ratt's manager, and they parlayed that into him appearing in the video, and they got the full appearance of him, because not only was he just in there, but he also dressed in drag, which is something that he used to do back in the 60s, and he did it in the Ratt video too, back when drag was not controversial, apparently. I saw them on this first tour. opened for Billy Squier, who was still a big deal at that point. His career crashed a few months later, but that's another story. You know, they had so many internal conflicts that's ultimately what dragged them down, and drug problems and stuff like that. But if they hadn't been plagued by those kinds of issues, you know, maybe they would have been like a Guns N' Roses or a Mötley Crüe who was able to survive and still be that arena level band nowadays.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think I might have brought this up previously, but Tina and I interviewed Bobby Blotzer on the A92A podcast. And one of the things we talked about with Bobby was that if Ratt would have stayed together, you know, obviously Robin passed away, but the other four members would have stayed together over the years, I think they absolutely would have been on the stadium tour with Def Leppard and Mötley Crüe. And it would have made so much sense. I would love to see that show. Unfortunately, like you said, they've had their differences and they weren't able to keep it together over the years. Warren and Steven are now performing together again, but I think maybe Bobby has some health issues that are preventing him from getting back involved in the band. So fingers crossed that one day there will be a Ratt reunion, but I guess time will tell.
But yeah, that's one of the most unfortunate aspects of that band, is that their conflicts really did prevent them from enjoying this second level of success. Like, I'm sure Piercy's doing really well with his solo band, probably better than he was 10 years ago. So he's making more money than he used to be and playing in front of bigger crowds. But if that was Ratt playing at those places and you didn't have to put Stephen Piercy, the voice of Ratt, and it was just Ratt, you'd get a lot more people, and they could be enjoying some of that retro, you know, celebration that's going on.
Alphabetical order, my number 3 pick for top 5 is Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction.
Of course.
This was the band's second official release. There it is in all its glory. They put out an EP with Geffen in March of 1986 that included 4 songs. The EP was titled Live Like a Sky, which is also a great little album, mini album. And putting out Live Like gave them time to disappear from the club scene because they were so heavy in the LA club scene, but they needed time to head into the studio to record Appetite for Destruction. They were supposed to release an EP 1 year earlier in 1985, but my boy Tracy Guns left the band to be replaced by Slash, and so they had a little bit of a lineup change. What's interesting about this album, and I didn't know this until I started to do some research, there are 2 sides. One is labeled G and one is labeled R, rather than side A and side B.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Tracks 1 through 6, which compose side G, all deal with drugs and hard life in the big city, or in other words, it's the Guns side. And the remaining tracks compose side R, and they all deal with love and sex and relationships, and that's the Roses side. So, fun little fact for you.
I had never heard that before, honestly.
I never
heard that album 5,000 times. I never heard that. That's interesting.
So my personal feelings about Appetite for Destruction, the Welcome to the Jungle video debuted in September of 1987. I was just starting the 8th grade. I would have been 13 years old. I remember this video premiering on MTV, and I was mesmerized. I was just staring at that video when I saw it for the first time. Like, I couldn't look away. It was just like Axl's character in the actual music video, where he's being like forced to watch the TV screens. That was literally 13-year-old me. I was totally mesmerized. The song itself sounded so different from a lot of the poppier music from the 80s metal bands that I had been listening to. And I have to say, a lot of people, you know, say, and probably rightfully so, that Nirvana killed glam metal, but I don't think that's fully accurate. I think GNR actually started the ball rolling because they were harder than the other bands. And Welcome to the Jungle was the first and only time you see them with ratted out hair and highliner, because by video number 2, they had moved on to kind of like an edgier look with flannel and headscarves and Slash with his hair in his face. And then you saw some of the more other glam-based bands move into that direction as they released new material. But this band was revolutionary, and that's why they can tour stadiums today in large arenas. I wish Steven Adler and Izzy Stradlin were still part of the lineup, but I love that Axl and Slash and Duff are hanging in there. I did not see this band perform live until 2019 at Austin City Limits. I never got to see them before then. They didn't tour close enough to where I lived, and they burned out pretty quickly. Like, when you look at the lifespan of Guns N' Roses, they started to fall apart shortly after the second album. But by the time I saw them in 2019, they were tight. Like Axl was on time. The band played a solid set. There were no shenanigans. So I saw a really great set from them. But again, I didn't ever see them until 2019.
Well, I don't remember.
Always be a top
I don't remember any shenanigans.
I'll pistol whip the next guy that says shenanigans.
But I did see them on the Use Your Illusion tour. It was before Use Your Illusion had come out, but Adler was already gone. They already had the new drummer in. Izzy was still there, but after about a year on the road or so on that album, he left. And I definitely feel, this is off the topic of Appetite, it's more on the Guns N' Roses and Continuum, but like I definitely feel that once Izzy Stradlin left the band, that there was something about Guns N' Roses that just changed.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
He was the Keith Richards and Axl was like the Mick Jagger. And you can't, if you listen to a Mick Jagger solo album, you'll notice like there's a massive absence. Okay. You need both of them there. And that's why I didn't get much out of Chinese Democracy, that album, because it just sounded like Axl and a bunch of different people. There's no continuity to it. Izzy kept it in rock and roll. And I know that Axl didn't want to keep doing blues-based rock and roll. His idea was after Use Your Illusion, he wanted to move into different types of sounds. Okay, that's respectable, but I also think that maybe you just end Guns N' Roses and you form a new band and you do your new music. Like, just like what Johnny Rotten did, where he ended the Sex Pistols and made Public Image Limited.
You said Izzy Stradlin was such a key member. I also think Steven Adler was a very key member of this band. And I think that his drum sound, just like Izzy's guitar, really helped create that overall vibe of Guns N' Roses. And so I do think once he left, and then of course once Izzy left, it kind of fell apart. I would love to see them again just because I love Slash and Duff and Axl, but it's not the same band as Appetite.
No, and I agree. If you listen to on Use Your Illusion, Adler's on one song, the song Civil War. That song sounds like classic Guns N' Roses. The rest of the album doesn't. It sounds like new Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
And when you listen to Civil War, you're like, that's what Use Your Illusion could have been. It could have been like that. I first discovered the Scorpions by going into a record store and seeing one where a man and a woman are in the back of a limousine and the woman is kind of topless and he's reaching over and grabbing her breast, but it's gum is connected. So all you see is this guy grabbing gum going, and it's okay. It's kind of corny now when I describe it, but let me tell you, at age 12, I was mesmerized by that. I would go to the record store and just kind of go to the Scorpions so I could see if it was in. I wasn't even buying the record. You know what I mean? Love It First Sting. That album was so massive in 1984. And like I said earlier, they are sort of proto hair metal or whatever because they existed starting in the late 60s even. They had a whole 70s era with Uli John Roth. And then they came into the 80s, which was their hit-making era. I think the first time I ever heard the Scorpions was No One Like You. That was the video. And I remember that video so vividly, the part where Rudolf Schenker grabs the guitar and he has those like forks on his eyes and he starts smashing it. It's set in Alcatraz, the Alcatraz prison. And it was left an indelible mark on me and it made me interested in the Scorpions. So when this next album came out, and they have Rock You Like a Hurricane, I was just like, damn, I'm 100% on board with this stuff. I mean, 100%. I also think it's funny with the Scorpions over any of these other bands because English is their second language.
Yeah.
So they only know how to talk rock and roll. And their drummer at the time, Herman Rarebell, is the one who was writing the lyrics at this point. Bad Boys Running Wild and their ballad, Still Loving You, great ballad. That did really well.
I was going to say, Still Loving You, all-time great song. And the live version is the one that I love the most. It's great.
It's a classic. The sound is perfect. The production is great. Klaus Meine's voice is great. You know, everything that works about the Scorpions worked here. This is why I think this is their best album. It's their most popular record, whatever. But it is definitely in my starter pack because a big part of this kind of music was older bands coming into the 80s and figuring out whether you can deal or not. If you can't adapt to what's going on, if you can't be Kiss or the Scorpions and figure out what's happening, then you're going to be, Blue Oyster Cult, who is one of my favorite bands ever, but they couldn't adapt to the 80s. Their career almost ended in like 81. So Scorpions they conquered the 80s. They even went into the 90s. I mean, for those watching, if you ever find that podcast, and I'll try to link to it, where they think it's an argument that Winds of Change by Scorpions was created with the help of the CIA to bring down the Soviet Union, because the Scorpions were the only band at the time allowed to perform in the Soviet Union, and they were massively popular. And it make a credible case. I don't know that I totally believe it.
That is interesting. I didn't have a lot of Scorpions material. I did, like every teen was part of that, Columbia House Record Club, or whatever it's called, BMG or something. And I had like a cassette that I bought that was a live recording, which is where the Still Loving You live version came from. And they do have some just absolutely incredible music.
I mean, Rock You Like a Hurricane, that's got to be in the top 10 80s tracks of all genres.
For sure.
I mean, it's just fucking phenomenal.
Mötley Crüe, Girls, Girls, Girls. This is the album where I first really got into Mötley Crüe. This was Mötley Crüe's 4th album. So they'd been doing this for a while by the time I got locked in. Girls, Girls, Girls was released in May of 1987, just finishing up my 7th grade year. The album reached number 2 on the Billboard 200 and sort of set the stage for Dr. Feelgood, which released 2 years later and did ultimately end up at number 1. But I had not seen the band live yet by the time Girls, Girls, Girls came out. It wasn't until the Dr. Feelgood tour that I saw Mötley Crüe in person. However, for me, this is the quintessential Crüe album because it's the one that solidified my love for this band. I had been exposed to Mötley Crüe, like I said before, at a very young age with my friend's older brother and his Shout at the Devil recording. When Girls, Girls, Girls came out, obviously I was a whole 4 years older. I was a ripe 13 years old, and I was completely and totally in love. Wild Side was the video that stole my 7th grade heart, and to date, it's still my favorite Mötley Crüe song. I will never not listen to Wild Side when it pops up. I've been a Nikki Sixx fan since the beginning. I really wasn't into any of the other band members. But Nikki, I mean, sigh. I even have a Mrs. Nikki Sixx t-shirt, which I will send you a picture of if I can find it.
Okay.
And a necklace that says Nikki Sixx, and I've got something on my wall here from Mötley Crüe that I'll show you. But I've met the band twice, and I've met Tommy Lee 3 times. Which is a whole different story. First, I met Tommy in Sioux Falls with Tina, and that was an I Love Lucy episode. I mean, that was like a crazy, crazy, crazy night that I'll go into some other time. But then I met the whole band once when I booked Mötley at the Tyson Event Center in Sioux City in 2014, and then again in 2022 in LA at SoFi Stadium on their first round of stadium tours. Nikki is always so kind and so nice, and I follow everything that Nikki does on social media. And I just absolutely love this band. If you had to tell me to pick my number 1 favorite band from this era, I would have to go with Mötley Crüe, because they're so near and dear to my heart. But I love Girls, Girls, Girls. I think it's a phenomenal album. It had Wild Side, of course, the title track, All in the Name of, You're All I Need. It was a packed album full of hits. The videos were phenomenal. And I think this is the one that was closest to me, but really also kind of set Mötley Crüe up for the future.
One of my picks was Shout at the Devil. So I was on the Mötley scene when it came out. Theater of Pain came out next in 85. That was the in-between album. And that was a massive album for them. Home Sweet Home and all of that. But I remember even at age 14 or whatever, when that came out, thinking that Theater of Pain was not quite as good as the last one. Now, I happen to be in the same company as Nikki Sixx, Vince Neil, and Tommy Lee have all said they don't think that album is that good, Theater of Pain. I think Girls, Girls, Girls was an improvement. Wild Side is amazing. Maybe their best single. I mean, hard to say, but that is a killer single. And it's hard to not like that song. I mean, really. Yeah. I mean, I know that was their peak drug period. That was apparently the height of Nikki's heroin problem. And a lot of the other issues were coming up. But they still managed to ride it out and have a big record that year. I was 16 when that came out. So I was prime for Mötley Crüe. I think it has some great songs, but I don't like it as much as the earlier stuff. But still, re-listening to it this time, getting ready for the video, I did sort of like it a little bit more than I had kind of remembered. Like, I don't like the live Jailhouse Rock at the end. That sounds like that seems like a throwaway, but the rest of it is really good.
I was fascinated with Nicky just because he was the hottest of all of them, in my personal opinion. And so, you know, this is back in the day when there was no internet. And so you're like trying to consume as much media as you can get your hands on, but it's like magazine articles and friends telling you stories or liner notes inside the albums. And so you didn't have the internet. You didn't know everything about what was going on with these guys. These albums, I chose them not necessarily because they're the best works from Mötley Crüe, but because it's my first exposure to the band and the ones I just feel fondest about. But it's also a great album. They have a lot of great songs, and it had pretty positive critical acclaim at the time when it came out. So,
and it still has two of their most all-time biggest songs, Girls, 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 and Wild Side, which are their two best known songs. Okay, great record. Right in this pack of Mötley Crüe peak records where you had Shout at the Devil, you had Theater of Pain, yeah, Girls, 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 you got Dr. Feelgood, and then the wheels fell off. Van Halen, 1984. This came out when I was 13. And again, it's a little bit sort of proto hair metal because they existed for many years before. But as I've said on other videos, I think Van Halen kind of defined 80s metal in the late 70s. They put a big part of the blueprint. Good looking lead singer, long blonde hair, guitar player, super flashy, crazy drummer with a big giant drum kit. Van Halen set the thing. They were constant like party rock. They were, I think somebody described them once as teeth rock because everybody smiles. You can see their teeth because people are so happy when they're hearing Van Halen. It was a big part of the introduction of women into the scene. Girls liked going to these shows. It wasn't scary like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or whatever. It was, this is fun. Everybody has fun. And that's the definitive thing about Van Halen. I think David Lee Roth is maybe the greatest frontman that's ever been. Up to a certain point. I mean, you know, everybody loses it at one point, but he was amazing in the 80s. This album isn't my favorite Van Halen album. If I had to rank them, this would not be my number one, my number two, my number three. But I think it's so defining for the era. Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher, Girl Gone Bad, so many great tunes on that record. You know, it's the end of the original Van Halen. I mean, I don't know your feelings on Sammy Hagar led the Van Hagar era. I never liked it. So for this was the end of Van Halen. And the reality of it is, it really was the end of Van Halen because even though they did get back with Roth in the early 2000s, Michael Anthony didn't come back. So they never had the four original guys. This was the end of that. There's something magical about it. I read Alex Van Halen's biography as part of our rock and roll book club, and he cuts off the book at the end of 1984. Even he realizes that Van Hagar was a waste of time. Like, they shouldn't have even bothered with it. My opinion. I got to see Van Halen on that tour. I was a ripe 13 years old at the show, and me and my friend went to the show, and my friend got a tour program of Van Halen, and these older burnout guys asked if they could borrow it to look at it. And they did, and then they just kept it.
Oh,
didn't give my friend back his book. It was so lame. I was like, those heshers.
Yeah, you know what's so interesting about this is I was like 10 when that album came out, and I don't remember being a huge Van Halen fan. I remember that they were played right alongside all of the other poppy stuff in the 80s, so I would of course hear Van Halen songs on the radio. I never equated Van Halen with the 80s rock scene until I read the book Nothing But a Good Time, which was written by Richard Bienstock and Tom Beaujour. We interviewed Tom on the A92A podcast, and that book really puts into perspective the influence that Van Halen had on that entire era of music. Like, a lot of the bands that were coming up in the LA club scene were looking at Van Halen as the model because Van Halen had been on that strip and they had performed at all of the local clubs, and they were like the iconic story of, look what you can eventually do if you're good enough. You can be like a Van Halen. And so a lot of those bands really modeled themselves after David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen and wanted to be like Van Halen. So I didn't listen to it in conjunction with any of the stuff I was listening to by the late 80s, but it is absolutely accurate that they had a huge influence on everything that came after them.
I've also heard a lot of anecdotes from a lot of those 80s bands. Vince Neil Stephen Piercy, other guys who said that David Lee Roth was very helpful to them when they were coming up.
Yeah.
Like he liked helping out new bands or showing singers, oh, try this, do that, or whatever, and offering up advice. He was very like open about doing that type of stuff. Roth is hysterical, and I find him to be one of the most fascinating rock stars ever. But I could also see how that would be trying on my patience with him, because he never shuts up. He never loses energy. He is just going all the time. He goes from this topic to that topic to this topic to that. And you're like, wow, is this all connected? But eventually he does circle back. If you listen long enough, he will circle back to his original point. He does know what he's doing. Yeah. His book, Crazy from the Heat, fantastic. Okay, it's a memoir to a certain degree, but it's just his sort of stream of consciousness weirdness. Now he jumps off from different issues and stuff, but it's also quite good. I think he's very, very interesting. And I hope that people do remember how great he was.
I loved it when he went out on his own too, by the way. He started producing the best videos, like, you know, Yankee Rose, and
his videos were great. Crazy from the Heat. And, California Girls was really good.
Look What the Cat Dragged In. This album was killer. It had a ton of great songs on it. Cry Tough, Play Dirty, Want Some, Need Some, I Want Action, Look What the Cat Dragged In, I Won't Forget You, Talk Dirty to Me. I mean, just the songs alone stand the test of time. This was released in 1986. It was the band's debut album. It peaked at number 3 in 1987, a whole year after its release, but the album sold 4 million copies worldwide. There were 4 singles released from this album: Cry Tough, Talk Dirty to Me, I Want Action, and I Won't Forget You. The videos were on constant rotation on MTV. They had a playfulness. They were fun. They were a party band for sure. They started that way. That's always been their MO. And in 2019, Rolling Stone included this album in their list of the 50 greatest hair metal albums of all time. So this was a great, great album. And
it defines the era so much. It
does.
Not only for the songs, but for the look, because they had the most glam look of any other band I think you could find.
I had that poster. I had that poster on my wall. Like the cover of the album, Look What the Cat Dragged In, is iconic because they leaned so hard into the glam movement. They most certainly looked more like women than men. And for whatever reason, teen girls everywhere were into it.
It was kind of crazy that was what was happening.
I know. This was what we were going for, apparently. We want men that look just like us. I Won't Forget You was the song that absolutely ended me. On A92A, Tina and I talk about when we knew that this was our sound, our music. And for me, it was I Won't Forget You. I remember seeing that video on MTV at Tina's house one summer evening and thinking, these are my people. I am part of this movement now. So I have a huge fondness for that particular song, a huge fondness for this band. I think somehow they've gotten over the years a bad rap, probably because they are so poppy and so glammy. But, Bret Michaels actually called me on my cell phone once to book a show with me in Sioux City at the Orpheum Theater. So Bret in particular is a hustler.
Now, let me ask you something. Did you know ahead of time he was going to call, or when he called and said, hey, this is Bret Michaels, you were like, bullshit?
I knew ahead of time because it was a show that we couldn't really come to terms on. And his manager said, look, Bret wants to talk to you personally, which was the end of it. Because if Bret's going to call me on the phone and say, hey, please book my band at your building, I'm going to be like, okay, Bret.
I'm signing that contract. Yeah, I'm signing. No problem. Let's do it.
And the show played.
That album, by the way, you said it sold 4 million copies. It was recorded for a budget of $23,000, which is bupkis, nothing.
Yeah.
The fact that they recorded it for so cheap and it was so profitable, it sold 4 million fucking copies. That's insane.
Nice ROI.
Exactly. And, it was funny because I was listening to it last night and I texted my friend Matt and I was like, what's funny about Look What the Cat Dragged In that I didn't remember was how lo-fi it is. Like, it's not super polished and produced.
No.
And that's when he threw back, well, it was only recorded for 23 grand. And it's like, yeah, back then that was nothing.
Yeah. And I remember when their subsequent album came out, like Open Up and Say Ah, which was next. I remember thinking that even as a fan, like, this is so well produced. Like, it's so glossy and, polished compared to Look What the Cat Dragged In, which was really 4 guys that had no money. I think they had to get the $23K from family and friends and people that would contribute because they had nothing. But they have worked their asses off over the years. I think they absolutely deserve to be on this list. And I'm proud to say I am a Poison fan.
I think when you sort of define the genre as Poison kind of did in the late 80s, they were the definitive.
Oh, yeah.
If you wanted to show a picture, what is hair metal? You show a picture of Poison. They're all glammy. They're doing this stuff that I think that ultimately, meant that when that style was coming out of favor, they're going to target them first.
Yeah.
And Poison was sort of targeted. I mean, they lasted a little bit longer and they're still here. So obviously the songs, people weren't just looking at the look. And I think that's something that's harder for people who weren't around in that era to remember. Like, it just sort of happened. Like, you were looking at bands like Ratt and Van Halen, and their thing was they had long hair and they wore spandex. But then it started moving into a more glammy look, a little more makeup, a little more this, a little more that. And all of a sudden you wake up in 1987 and it's a whole fucking movement. And nobody, and if you weren't part of it, it was, you either had to be a thrash band or you were just going to get kicked to the curb in terms of metal at that period. You had to sort of adapt.
Poison, to their credit, they have kept the original lineup together. And if you remember, Poison was part of the first stadium tour. It was Joan Jett, and then it was Poison, and then it was Mötley Crüe, and then it was Def Leppard. And so I think the reason they're on that stadium tour is because they've kept their original lineup. They've kept it going. I remember Nicky was quoted in one of his books that I read about not being super happy about having Poison on that first stadium tour because he didn't feel like they fit in. He felt they were way too poppy, way too glam, but he kind of had to eat his words because though the Poison was who the audience wanted to see. Like, I think they did some sort of a survey, or they were asking family and friends, like, who's the band we should bring with us? And everybody wanted Poison.
There was a period where they didn't have CC DeVille. He was out for a brief period of time in the early 90s. And I remember watching live on the MTV Video Awards, their implosion when they started to play Unskinny Bop, and then CC decided to play a different song. And then that was the end of that lineup of Poison. Like, I think he was fired a day or two later. And it was like, I remember watching that with CC's pink hair, and he was like playing the wrong song. And I was like, what is going on? I've never seen a band do that in such a public display.
I think they literally got off the stage and he and Brett had a fist fight. Like, I think that's how that ended up. But then Richie Kotzen took CC's place for a period of time as the guitarist in Poison. Obviously not the same. So the fact that they've got all 4 original members back in the lineup is fantastic.
Okay, so your 4 picks are Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet, Def Leppard, Hysteria, Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, Mötley Crüe, Girls, 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 and Poison, Look What the Cat Dragged In. That's your starter pack.
Of my starter set.
That's what you got to start. If you're looking to get into this music, that's where you start. According to Erika, for me, it was Def Leppard, Pyromania. It was Mötley Crüe, Shout at the Devil, Ratt, Out of the Cellar, Scorpions, Love at First Sting, and Van Halen, 1984. I think you're not going wrong with any of those 10 selections, frankly. Our next episode, by the way, is going to be what we're calling our homework assignment. And that is, we each assigned each other an album from this era that we weren't super familiar with, that wasn't, something we could just pull extraneous information right out of our brains at nowhere. So I'm not going to reveal what it is, but I assigned Erika an album. She assigned me an album, and we are going to discuss our homework assignments on the next episode.
Can't wait.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave comments, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all of that stuff. Look for the Dark Stuff Podcast on Facebook. We do a little more updates on that. I post a lot of extra content on that place. So anyways, thank you very much for watching, everyone. We will see you next month here on Rock of Aging.